Click for IB Biology. Here we are looking at the applications of the theory in the oxygen dissociation curve within the context of the tissues and gas exchange. A PDF of this presentation is in the description below, along with a quick quiz to check your understanding of this content. When considering the process of gas exchange and the oxygen dissociation curve, we need to return to the circulation for a moment and recall that when blood passes from the heart to a tissue, so that's here in the aorta and here in the pulmonary artery, there is no exchange of its contents either out or into the blood, and that is equally true of the vein systems which exist. So the only exchange that takes place is actually at the lungs or in one of the tissues of the body. If we come across to the oxygen dissociation curve here, we can see that if we are at a partial pressure of 10 kilopascals, then hemoglobin will be 100% saturated, fully loaded with oxygen. And then recall that in the lungs, the partial pressure of oxygen, standard partial pressure of oxygen, is 21 kilopascals of oxygen, and therefore on our axis would be way down this end here. And so when blood has been to the lungs, it is 100% saturated with oxygen. And as that blood passes through the pulmonary vein to the heart, and then from the heart to the tissues, the muscles in this case, it will remain 100% saturated with oxygen, as there is no opportunity for exchange before it arrives at the muscle. So that's the loading process. Equally, earlier in a presentation, I told you that the partial pressure of oxygen in a muscle would be about 5 kilopascals. So if we look at that situation on the oxygen dissociation curve here, that would be here. So blood would be arriving at 100% saturation. As it arrives into the muscle, it encounters a region of 5 kilopascals and lower. And so rather than being 100% saturated, the hemoglobin will unload its oxygen down to perhaps 50% saturation. The interesting question is, what are the factors which might bring the partial pressure of oxygen lower in the muscle so that even more oxygen might be released in response to the demand for oxygen? That will be explored in the next videos. Here we have the presentation of the oxygen dissociation curve under the influence of increasing concentrations, or if you prefer, partial pressures of carbon dioxide. Notice that this curve here is 3 kilopascals, 4 kilopascals, and 6 kilopascals of carbon dioxide. The concentration of carbon dioxide is increasing. When this occurs, the curve is shifted to the right. This is a classic phrase that you should use in your examination. What is the effect of carbon dioxide on the oxygen dissociation curve? Answer, it shifts to the right. the consequence of the shift of the oxygen dissociation curve to the right is a decrease in the affinity for oxygen. Let's see that in the graph. So with 3 kilopascals here of carbon dioxide, then we would expect to get 50% unloading of oxygen. But with 4 kilopascals, the curve shifts to the right and we encounter the 5 kilopascal of oxygen level here. So if we increase the carbon dioxide level, the curve shifts to the right, and in the tissues where the partial pressure is 5 kilopascals, now we're going to unload even more oxygen. And of course, with a higher concentration of carbon dioxide, the curve has shifted even further to the right, this curve here, so that when we get to the tissues with more carbon dioxide around, the unloading of hemoglobin goes all the way down to this point here, with more oxygen released into the tissues. So to summarize that idea, as we increase the carbon dioxide levels, the curve shifts to the right, and we have, which is this point here, and we would then say, describe that as saying that there is a decrease in the affinity for oxygen. On a more tissue-based discussion, what we're saying is that the more carbon dioxide produced by a respiring tissue, the more oxygen is released. And that would be consistent with our understanding that the more respiration taking place, the more oxygen that the cell would require, and the more oxygen is provided. So rather than a blanket diffusion from a high concentration to a low concentration, this introduces you to a very neat idea that the blood and oxygen is released in demand by the cell. So the amount of oxygen which has been released by hemoglobin reflects the demand for oxygen within the cell. We could call this a demand-led system. There are other factors which can affect the association and dissociation of oxygen with hemoglobin, and there are other types of hemoglobin that we should consider in our discussion on gas exchange, and these are explored in the videos linked below.